Hello, geography class. Today, what I want to talk about is the last two subregions in Latin America. The first two that we talked about, if you remember, were Mexico and Central America and the Caribbean. And I told you there was four different regions. So the ones we're going to talk about today are Spanish-speaking South America as well as Brazil. And when I talked about Mexico and Central America, one of the first things I started out with was kind of their beginnings, or those ancient empires like the Mayans and the Aztecs. Today, what I specifically want to talk about in South America are the Inca. The Inca are descendants of people who came a long time ago across that Bering Strait, or the Bering Land Bridge that connected Siberia to present-day Alaska. And I told you that they crossed that bridge and they made their way down into the United States and through Canada, and eventually they made their way down into South America. If you remember, in the last video that you watched, I talked about the isthmus that connected Central America to South America, so connecting the two continents of North and South America together. It's kind of a land bridge. The people were able to cross that land bridge and get into South America. And these Inca, a tribe or a group of people, were a very successful group, and they made their capital in Cusco, which is located in Peru, and their empire was really big. It stretched up to 25,000 miles in length all the way along the west coast in South America. The interesting thing about the Inca, however, is that their fate ended up a lot like the fate of the Aztecs or the Mayans that we discussed in Mexico. And their fate really rested in the hands of a man named Francisco Pizarro. He was the leader of the Spanish in the early 1500s, and he actually came over and attacked the Inca army, killed many of its warriors, and it took the emperor as a prisoner. And the Spanish, under Pizarro, told the people in South America that if they gave, or told the Incas that if they gave him silver and gold, that they would give the empire back. And so the Incas came up with that silver and gold. However, the Spanish didn't give back that empire. The emperor, they actually killed him in the end, which was unfortunate because they did what they had asked to do, and yet the Spanish didn't give them back. So it's really that second Spanish conquest that we've talked about, because the first one I talked about Cortez coming and taking over the Mayans and the Aztecs, but now we have Pizarro coming over and taking the Incas, specifically in South America. So, like the fate of the other ones in Mexico, the Spanish forced the Inca into labor and forced them to work on plantations and leave their traditional village. They also forced their language, which is obviously Spanish from Spain, on the Inca, and their religion, Catholic, which we still see a lot of in South America, and like I said, in Central America and Mexico. There still is a little bit of Quechua, which is the religion of the Inca that still survives today. But like I said, the majority of that language in South America is now Spanish because of the people from Spain coming over. Just like in Mexico and just like in Central America, again, these people wanted their independence after a while. They didn't want to be ruled by Spain. They wanted to be free and their own people. And two things that really inspired South America to gain its independence was the American Revolution and the French Revolution. And there's two people who kind of led the way towards independence. Simon Bolivar and Jose de San Martin were two individuals who really led the way for South American independence. Bolivar, he freed Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Bolivia, while San Martin was able to free Argentina, Chile, and Peru. And when we look at these two individuals and what they were able to free, it's important to see that Argentina and Chile were the first to be free, because when the Spanish came over, they made their central location or their main capital in this place, Lima. And once Argentina and Chile were so far away, they were not easily, but they were the first ones to be able to gain their independence from the Spanish because they were further away from Lima, Peru, where the Spanish kind of, you could say, had their headquarters. So they were able to gain independence for a lot of these locations. However, once South American countries started to gain their independence, it was really a lot harder for them to get moving after that, because of after being under control of Spain for so long, it's really hard to kind of take on your own and do your own form of governments. And governments such as an oligarchy, a government by few, or an authoritarian government, so like obedience over authority, like an individual person, it's a lot harder for them to come back after gaining their independence. And this picture right here kind of shows what an oligarchy looks like. And this is what was happening in South America after gaining their independence. So it was really hard to get their feet off the ground. We have these big fat guys ruling over all the little people. So it's government by just a few people, and that's really hard. And it's hard to run that way without the little people having their individual say in things. So we can move on from politics and start to look at culture in South America. Some of the big issues dealing with culture in South America are literature, music, and arts and crafts. Literature is very popular in South America, and it kind of takes individuals from South America and puts them in the world spotlight. Some of the people that were popular writers from South America, one is Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and he's popular for writing two specific novels, one in 1967 called 100 Years of Solitude. I'm sorry, the other one he wrote was in 1989, a little more popular. That was The General and His Labyrinth. Another thing that was popular in South America is music, and the music that you'd hear if you traveled there would often consist of drums, guitars, marambas, maracas, and flutes. And in like Mexico, when we talked about arts and crafts, it's also very popular in South America. And one can look at South American culture and look at the arts and crafts and see pottery and textiles, glasswork and metalwork taking place in South America. Going away from going away from culture and moving into economics, we can see how they are a little similar yet still different from Central America and Mexico. Most of the economies in South America are based upon agriculture, just like in the United States and in Canada that we looked at. However, there's also a lot of mining and extraction of resources, such as oil and minerals in these places. And that shouldn't be hard to realize, because when we talk about the Spanish conquestors coming over, one of the main things they wanted was silver and gold, because they do have those resources in these places. However, not as much as those people like Pizarro wanted in the first place. The economics of the region, it really varies. Like I said, there's a lot of agriculture, but South America is such a large location. There's so many different natural resources in this area. Some of the places that you can look are in the north, where they have a lot of agriculture. They grow crops, and that's the same in the south. Like in Argentina, they produce great quantities of grain and livestock. And one of the places they do that, if you remember a couple of videos back, are on the Pampas, or the large areas of farming that they use in South America. You can look in the west, and obviously in western South America it borders the sea, and fishing is a very large industry in that region. One of the interesting places in South America is Chile, and Chile has been a very, very successful location in South America. One thing that they export is fruit and vegetables, and they export these to North America. And one of the reasons they export these to North America is because while we have winter, Chile has their growing season. So another important piece of information about Chile is that their education system is really, really good. Chile has a literacy rate in their adult population of up to 95%. So they also have a very good universities. And for a while, the universities started to go down because they were having trouble in their government. And there was one man named Pinochet who was really dragging down their education system, and they needed reforms in that education system after he left. And when he did in 1990, the universities really came back in full force, and they started to do a lot better. Comparing their education to the rest of South America, Chile's is better, but South America still does have a very good education system. Literacy rates among the people in South America is up near 90%. Another location that we want to look at, and this is the fourth and final subregion that we've looked at Mexico, looked at Central America and the Caribbean, and just now looked at Spanish-speaking South America. And this last region we want to look at is Brazil, and I think Brazil personally is one of the more interesting of the four subregions in South America and in all of Latin America. Brazil has a lot of Portuguese, and the reason they have Portuguese heritage is because Napoleon, when he was doing his crusades, which you'll learn about in world history, he was kind of taking over and wanted to take over all of Europe. And so a lot of people fled Portugal and came to their colony in Brazil because they had controlled that at that time. Brazil became a Portuguese colony in 1494 with the Treaty of Tordesillas. And so they had that to kind of flee to when Napoleon was taking over anything. When they got there, they hoped to find silver and gold, just like everywhere else in all of Latin America. And once they got there, when they realized there wasn't that much silver and gold, they started to create sugar plantations. And that is a very good crop because of the climate in this area. Like everywhere else, once they got there, Brazil wanted their independence from Portugal. And there wasn't a big war or anything for that. What they did is they kind of signed a petition, and they gave that petition to the son of Portugal's king, Dom Pedro, and they told him that they wanted to be an independent nation. He was able to get that passed in September of 1882, and then they became a free and independent country. Brazil has a very diverse population. There is an estimated 300,000 to 400,000 native people still living in Brazil. But besides those Brazilians, there's a large number of people from Portugal, Germany, Italy, and Spain. People have come from Lebanon and Syria, and one big group of people living in Brazil is the Japanese. Brazil is actually the second largest Japanese population in the world outside Japan. When the Portuguese came over and were trying to escape Napoleon's wrath, they brought a lot of their own culture with them. And we can still see that today. We still see a large population of Catholics living in Brazil. The economy in Brazil does very well. It is the 10th largest economy in the world. One of the things that works well for them is they have all these rivers. And when you have rivers, you can get electricity from those rivers. They also have a large amount of steel being produced, and the steel in turn turns into automobiles, and then the automobiles are actually run from ethanol, and ethanol is a fuel that comes from sugar cane, and they have a lot of sugar in Brazil, and so they can take that sugar cane, turn it into ethanol, and it's a lot cheaper for them to power the automobiles. But there's still a wide gap between the rich and the poor, and increasing urbanization is one result of attempts by many Brazilians to improve their lives by looking for jobs in the cities, to get out of the rural areas and go into the urban areas in search of more jobs. In 1960, about 22% about 22% of people living in Brazil lived in an urban area. And in just 43 years, that statistic has bumped from 22% all the way up to 81%. So that's quite a large gap in a short amount of time of people moving from rural areas into urban areas. Another kind of interesting statistic about people living in Brazil is that a lot of the population ended up living on the east coast of Brazil. And really 80% of the population still lives within 200 miles of the sea, and we can see that on this population distribution map. And what the government of Brazil has been trying to do lately is get this population to move further away from the coast and further west, because there's a lot of natural resources in the west to be used, and they're not taking full advantage of those. Life today in Brazil it's very good. One of their most colorful feast days is the Carnival, and they also have a samba, which is a Brazilian dance with African influences. Okay, and then there's a capoeira, and that's a martial art and dance that developed in Brazil, and that again has African origins. So we can see some African origins in Brazil today.